In another episode in the Sovereign Renaissance, a channel where we explore the arcane, the mystical, and all things multi-dimensional. In today's topic, we're going to be looking at a rather common archetype among society is the hater archetype. So, to view the detractor or hater archetype through a sentimental and inviting lens, we have to look at the sharp edges of their words to see the quiet, aching human vulnerability underneath. When you strip away the hostility, hating ceases to be an act of malice and reveals itself as a tragic, deeply misdirected love story. It is the story of a soul longing for connection, caught in the painful duality of wanting to be seen while terrified to step into the light. The hidden sanctuary of admiration. At its heart, the dualism of a detractor is the tragic split between adoration and alienation. To look so closely at someone else, to notice the subtle nuances of their work, their style, or their life, requires an immense amount of care. A detractor is, in essence, an audience member who is utterly captivated. They sit in front they sit in the front row of your life, memorizing every line and every gesture. The sentimentality lies in realizing that they are not drawn to you by a powerful magnetic gravity. They recognize a spark in you that feels incredibly familiar, yet devastating out of reach. Their criticism is just a distorted, broken echo of praise. The only way their bruised ego knows how to say, I see you, I see how brightly you shine, and it reminds me of the darkness I am sitting in. To understand the detractor archetype, you have to look at the past, you have to look past the surface level hostility and examine the psychological split happening underneath. Pure, unadulterated hatred is actually quite rare. Instead, what we usually call hating is a deeply dualistic, conflicted state of mind. A detractor is caught in a psychological tug of war between two opposing internal forces: intense fixation and intense rejection. Here's a breakdown of how this dualism manifests. The paradox of obsession and repulsion. The most glaring duality of a detractor is that their behavior mirrors the exact mechanics of a superfan, just flip into reverse. So the fan, for example, would consume every piece of content, tracks, milestones, and spends emotional energy celebrating the target, while the hater consumes every piece of content, tracks, milestones, and spends emotional energy deconstructing the target. To hate something effectively, you have to pay the price. You have to pay incredibly close attention to it. It creates a bizarre dynamic where the detractor is emotionally enslaved to the very person or thing they claim to despise. They want the target to disappear, yet they rely on the target's existence to fuel their own daily emotional output. Projection, the shadow, and the ideal. Psychologically, hating is almost always a defense mechanism driven by projection, specifically involving in what Carl Jung called the shadow. The duality here splits into two distinct internal conflicts: the hater's internal state and the external projection, resentment of the ideal the target possesses, a trait, freedom, or success that the detractor desperately wants but feels incapable of achieving. The hate is actually repressed admiration, rejection of the shadow. The target exhibits a flaw or a vulnerability that the detractor secretly loathes or hates in themselves. By attacking it outly, they avoid facing it inward. Therefore, the detractor is never actually fighting the target. They are fighting an internal war against a mirror, using the target as a proxy, or quite an unfortunate one. The low self-esteem superiority complex is split. On the surface, a detractor often adopts a persona of hypercriticism, acting as an elite judge who is above the target. They project supreme confidence and discernment. Underneath, however, this behavior is triggered by a profound sense of lack or powerlessness. The upper half, the conscious mind, convinces itself, I am smarter, more authentic, and better than them. The lower half, the unconscious mind, fears, I am stagnant, unnoticed, and failing while they are moving forward. Hating, therefore, is an attempt to close this gap. By tearing the other person down, the detractor attempts to artificially raise their own relative standing without having to do the hard work of building themselves up. Public execution for private validation. There is a dualism in the utility of hate. Hating is really a solitary act. It thrives on an audience. A detractor seeks to publicly diminish someone else's value, but the true goal is entirely internal and private. They are seeking a temporary hit of dopamine and validation to soothe their own anxiety. It is destructive behavior used to achieve a constructive internal feeling or self-soothing, which is why it is ultimately unsustainable and addictive. The ultimate duality. The detractor cannot exist without the object of their hatred. In trying to diminish the target's light, they inadvertently tether their own identity, time, and mental real estate to that person's orbit. Essentially, a detractor is an admirer who has lost the courage to admit. The final reflection. In the grand theatre of human emotion, the hater is really a villain acting out of pure malice. They are a mirror cracked by their own unhealed fractures. To witness a detractor is to look at someone else trapped in a heavy, exhausting duality, holding a magnifying glass to the world's flaws while desperately trying to hide their own vulnerabilities from the light. The two sides of the mirror, or two sides of a coin. Behind the sharpest critiques and the loudest scorns lies a hidden, fragile truth. The mask, a shield of indifference, cynicism, or outright hostility, designed to keep the world at a distance and project an illusion of superiority. At the core, a quiet archive of unmet expectations, forgotten passions, or the painful ache of watching someone else fly where they once crashed. The vitriol is not a sign of hatred for you, but a profound, misdirected mourning of a vision of themselves they could not save. They pay you the ultimate, tragic compliment. They spend their finite time and energy obsessing over a light because their own room has grown too dark. Will the hater archetype ever evolve beyond the misdirected and mirrored illusory hatred of self and others, and finally address the toxic internal imbalances? Or will the hater archetype extend and evolve beyond humans to perhaps artificial humanoids? Now imagine that actually, like even hating on a humanoid. One of the greatest disasters, in my opinion, would have to be humanoids unintentionally learn and compute the exact negative emotions from humans. Now imagine like a humanoid learning how to hate on another human or on another humanoid just by observing humans. Wow. But until next time, please do like, share, and subscribe, and goodbye.